Getting ready to start? Blake, we good? I didn't know if you could see with your hair in your eyes. Okay. All right, colleagues, welcome. We have two briefings. No, just a single briefing today. To report on the evaluation of the Worker Classification Protection Unit. Obviously, save your questions till the end. Write them down if you have to, so we can get through this. I know you guys want to go have lunch before we have our bill hearings. So if we could go ahead and have Michael Powell, Allison Binder, and Commissioner Vert. And I apologize, ma'am. Your first name, it befuddles me. I try. I know if you could say it again so I could get used to it, that'd be great. Thank you.
Sure. It's Dave Key. Dave Key, like they've gone to the store.
Like Dave. TH like with a D.
Like a Dave Key.
Dave Key.
Like right. Dave left.
I have a horrible hearing. I got you. All right.
D will work too.
Thank you very much, ma'am. You guys can go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the committee. My name is Mike Powell. I am the Director of the Office of Program Evaluation and Government Accountability. We're in the Department of Legislative Services, and this is Allison Binder from our office. Last year, we were asked to do an evaluation, a performance evaluation of an office called the Worker Classification Protection Unit. They are part of the Division of Labor and Industry over at the Department of Labor. So there was a Workforce Fraud Act in 2009 that created this office. And then there was also an executive order that created something called the Joint Enforcement Task Force on Workplace Fraud. What the Worker Classification Protection Unit does is it investigates and enforces the misclassification of workers who should be regular employees but are misclassified as independent contractors. And it only does this in the construction and landscaping industries. The Joint Enforcement Task Force includes other parts of the Department of Labor and external agencies such as the Comptroller's Office. And what they have been able to do is share information on, again, employees who have been misclassified to the benefit of the what I'll call the WCPU. So with that, let me turn it over to Allison Binder for the next couple of slides. We are not going to be long, and we look forward to sharing this with you.
So in terms of background, in Maryland, you can divide the workforce generally into two categories. So individuals who are employees and individuals who are independent contractors. The basis for that categorization of a worker is one or the other is rooted in the relationship between the worker and the business that compensates that worker. For tax purposes, which it would be basically the difference between someone filing a W-2 or a 1099. So this slide just gives a general idea of how many W-2s and 1099s are filed in Maryland. These are across all industries from 2009 to 2020. And we do want to note that these are the number of filings. So a person could have more than one of each category, more than one of both categories. So the number of 1099 filings does show an increasing trend over time. It's about 170 more in 2020 compared to 2029. In order to determine whether an individual is an employee or an independent contractor, Maryland uses the ABC test. So worker misclassification is what occurs when a worker who should legally be classified as an employee based on the relationship with their employer is misclassified. This may be intentional or not. But they're classified as an independent contractor. So workers classified as employees receive a range of legal protections. Employers are subject to wage and hour laws, must pay unemployment insurance, Social Security, and other payroll taxes. They're also responsible to pay workers' compensation premiums for their employees. So if a worker is classified as an independent contractor, that worker does not have any of those protections or access to any of those benefits. The employers who properly classify workers may incur higher labor costs than those who are misclassifying workers. And as Mike mentioned, in Maryland, the Workplace Fraud Act creates a rebuttable presumption that anyone who is paid for work in construction or landscaping is an employee of the person paying them for that work. So when we went to investigate the unit, the WCPU unit, we found no written policies or procedures that dictated how a complaint about worker misclassification and the subsequent investigation should be handled by the staff of that unit. There were Google Forms and Google Sheets that were used to track some of the case information, but that data did not include the case documents such as letters, canceled checks, etc. So we reviewed all available paper files that we found in the office, as well as these electronic databases of cases from 2014 through the first half of 2023. What you see on the screen there is these pie chart, just giving you the percentage of investigations that we discovered to have records that were either paper only, electronic only, or in the case where some were both, a digital record as well as a paper file. So once we found what was available to us to review, we compiled this chart that you see here, which shows the availability of data from the WCPU from the time running from 2010 through the first half of 2023. We found that no year had a complete electronic and paper file record. The years from 2017 through 2023 each have some or most, but not all paper files corresponding to the electronic log of investigations. There were no available WCPU or Joint Task Force reports from 2021 through the time of the evaluation. This slide shows the annual number of investigations conducted by the unit over time. Prior to 2020, investigations in consecutive years dropped by as much as 224 investigations, shown as 2024 to 2015, or rose by as much as 221, as shown between 2016 and 2017. From 2020 to 2022, the number of investigations leveled out and averaged about 41 annually. So this slide is showing you where the unit discovered through their investigation that there was an incident of worker misclassification, and they issued a citation for that misclassification. This does not happen, of course, in all investigations. This graphic gives us an annual breakdown of which investigations ended with a citation, those that did not end in a citation, and then the small gray bars that you see throughout are where we could not determine the outcome of the investigation due to a lack of data of some sort. The percentage of investigations that resulted in a citation was at its highest in 2014, where 79% of the investigations resulted in a misclassification citation. That was 212 out of the 269 investigations that year. In 2015, there were far fewer investigations, or only 45, but the majority still ended with WCPU issuing a citation. From 2020 through 2022, OPEGA, or our office, could not find a record that WCPU had issued any citations at all. So to describe it in percentages, we have the percent of investigations that resulted in a citation was at its highest at 79% in 2014. And from 2016 to 2022, no year had been above 10%.
Thanks, Allison. And I just want to back up for a second so we understand what this process is like at the WCPU. So they get a complaint that a worker has been misclassified. That complaint might come from a business competitor who's classifying their employees correctly and feel like it's a disadvantage to them. It might come from an individual, or a lot of those complaints are generated internally. Let's say an employee gets laid off and they go to make an unemployment insurance claim, and unemployment doesn't have any record that unemployment insurance premiums were paid for that person. So they might make that referral over to the WCPU. And then the WCPU will send out what's called a request for investigation letter. Remember, there's a presumption that someone is an employee unless they can document and prove that somebody meets the conditions of that ABC test. Failure to respond can result in a fine. Investigations finding misclassification can result in a citation and potential penalty. The WCPU also has the opportunity to bring employers into compliance in lieu of paying a fine in some cases. So we have 5 recommendations in our report. I'll cover them pretty quickly. One is they should get an information system that supports their business processes. And, they started and they were just doing things on paper. At some point, they create an electronic database, but they would really benefit from a system that can, keep copies of documents in it, that can track the life cycle of an investigation, that can document if a fine was issued, et cetera. The Joint Enforcement Task Force that I mentioned before, they had created a portal where this information could be shared. So again, like if somebody made an unemployment insurance claim and there was no record of that person and UI suspected maybe that person had been misclassified, they would use this portal to notify the WCPU. That seemed to be a very effective tool, but that portal no longer is operable. I don't believe anyone's able to log into it. And our recommendation is that they should reopen that portal or rebuild it. And then the Joint Enforcement Task Force, there's no records that they really met over a number of years. And we think that they should reconvene, issue annual reports as required by law. A brief word on staffing. So they may have had as many as 7 or more staff people at some point in the history of the organization. It's tough to tell. The records on that don't really exist, and there's not really an organizational history anymore due to employee turnover. That was down to 2.5 people when we started our evaluation. And again, those 2.5 people there had not issued a citation for worker misclassification in 3 years. Our recommendation is that the unit and the Department of Labor should determine just how many people are necessary to be able to investigate, thoroughly investigate any complaint about employee misclassification. And then one of the things that the WCPU employees, when we were there, acknowledged is that none of them spoke Spanish, and Spanish is the first, or in some cases, only language of many, many of the employees that are investigated, as well as some of the employers that are investigated as well. And so those are our 5 modest recommendations. Ms. Verk is here from the department, and she started just a few months before we began this evaluation. So I think she would say she was learning this along with us. We appreciated her cooperation. That's the end of our presentation. We're happy to take questions now, or maybe Ms. Verk, you'd like her to present, and then I guess any of us can take questions.
I'd like to start, sir. So obviously, for some clarification, you guys are not part of the WCPU, correct?
No, we work for the Department of Legislative Services,
Right.
independent, objective, fact-based evaluators of government performance.
And so I guess I want to start, and Ms. Verk, I know that your time on service has been somewhat limited, but well, before I do that, let me go into a brief question I have from the evaluators with regards to how you determine classification, because the ABC test that you used, I'm sure there's case law supporting that, but because it sounds like you guys totally step out of the whole subcontractor. Like if I work on a project, I'm a prime, I'm going to hire a subcontractor. It may be an individual who's a painter. Are you saying that individual is now my employee?
It is very complicated. It depends, and it is pretty thoroughly covered in COMAR. There are a bunch of, Ms. Verk shared with me the other day, there's a bunch of different circumstances in there where it depends on the relationship between the employer, the subcontractor, and then their employees. Are they performing work on the same site? Are they supplying their own materials? All of those, there's a number of variables that go into making that determination.
Without a doubt, I just wanted to, because it seemed very vague the way this was laid out. So I was a little concerned that this was going well outside of the scope of case law when it made it so vague or simple. It's much more complicated than that. I just want to make, okay, great. It is
very complicated,
yes.
But appropriate there are appropriate subcontractor relationships where those people are independent contractors.
There's teaming agreements, subcontractor, primes, subs, there's, I definitely know. I just want to make sure it wasn't this simple.
Yep.
So I guess the remainder of the questions, I'll talk, to, Commissioner Verk. I guess first of all, how many investigators you guys have in the WCPU?
Right this second, we have 3 investigators. We are in the process, and we have 1 additional investigator who is a fluent English and Spanish speaker. We have detailed from another unit. She normally investigates wage and hour cases and violations, and we've detailed her.
Is that what the budget requires, or is that just where you guys are? I'm trying to, my concern is it sounds like you guys are a very reactive unit. And I say you guys because I take it this is under your charge, correct?
It is now, yes.
Yes. And so it sounds like by design and funding, it's a very reactive unit. So they don't go out to sites and discuss, talk to people. And to me, it's much like MOSH or OSHA. It really is a problem if we're waiting for the calls to be made. And so I guess I'm concerned, since it's been well over a year since the secretary took over, why there aren't recommendations in the budget as far as beefing this up. Because we're going to lock people up and send them to jail for these violations when we don't even have enough investigators. And you testified on that bill in your support of it, but we don't seem to have enough investigators to even notify these individuals, and many of them who may be moving in good faith, that they are violating the law.
Absolutely.
So I'm very concerned with the juxtaposition of those two things, how we want to increase the penalties that we have when we have yet to really exercise what we're supposed to be doing as a division. And it's, unless I'm incorrect, it sounds like it should be something more than waiting for calls to come in, right?
Yes, it should be, sir. And if I can speak to the central question you raised about what the budgeted positions are, I think Mr. Powell delineated that over time there has been stripping of positions from this unit. And as of right now, in the governor's budget, there is in fact a request for 5 over-the-target pins for this unit to support this work and to support and deepen the work of the Joint Enforcement Task Force that the governor just signed the executive order on in January.
And again, and that's why I'm concerned, because I see these executive orders, but I see them almost pie in the sky at this point. So how many people do you have total? Well, I'm sorry, will you have, let's say the 5 go in, how many people will you have?
We will have 8 investigators at that point. And again, hopefully we'll have some flexibility in terms of detailing, particularly for the bilingual investigators who are difficult to recruit.
And I say, because again, I'll go that my frustration really is the fact that now it's been a year. So last year when people came on board, we were very mellow with people because the good secretary and Secretary Wu, we knew she just got on board. But it's been a year, and the fact that these still haven't been dealt with, it's very frustrating. I understand that you guys need more, but it sounds like you're well understaffed now, correct?
Right now we are, yes.
Yeah, and again, this is why I said we're coming in and testifying in support of toughening legislation when we haven't really put in the effort to make sure that we can enforce the current legislation. So when we have these discussions during these hearings, that's the generation, not just my consternation, but some of my colleagues on both sides, is that we keep asking for more when we're not doing right with what we've got. So I would ask you to please, I really like the secretary to explain to me why we're still this far behind. If this was something readily available and we knew about it, as far as the lack of individuals that we have.
I think at the time that this program evaluation began, and Mr. Powell can correct me, it was in June of 2023. And I think at that point, I know at the time that it began, I myself was trying to get my arms around what all the units did and what they should be doing, and what they had the resources to do, what was, what the issues were. And it is based on that assessment, which again happened in parallel to the assessment that OPEGA conducted at the same time, that the secretary did approve and DBM subsequently approved, and then the governor approved these 5 over-the-target investigators for this specific unit for the exact reason that you're describing, sir, which is that we felt that it was an understaffed and under-resourced unit.
Without a doubt. But to be clear, you guys, how many people do you currently have?
We have 4 right now.
How many are you budgeted to have?
That I can't I believe.
Do you understand my question? I was like, I believe there are some vacancies in your
Yes,
unit
there are.
that haven't been filled. And this sounds like a very important, and I'm sorry, I don't want to put you on the spot. I'm just saying,
Feel free.
this is a frustration that we have. We know this is important.
Yes.
And I don't disagree. You can tell by the numbers how things have been handled in the past, the last administration. And I believe, while I don't want to over police, policing is necessary. So I just wanted to make sure you guys understand my feelings on this.
Yes.
And how there will be pushback when you guys keep coming in to ask for something and I hate to say you guys, but it is now you guys aren't yet doing what you're supposed to be doing. If you guys need more than 5 pins, now's a great time. That we don't have to limit it, because what I don't want is what we're getting, and we're getting into the overage of, okay, well, now let's criminalize things. Now let's lock people up, when we can do it the civil way, where we can do it where people are put on notice, where we can have actual individuals going out to our sites,
Yes,
talking to these individuals well before these complaints come out.
we should.
And do you believe with those 5 individuals and everybody else staffed up, that will be enough to start active investigations? Or are we still going to be in a reactive mode?
I think it's enough to begin active investigations in a strategic manner. Is it enough to cover the construction sites in this state where misclassification might be happening? No, it is absolutely
And
not.
that's the question I have for you, ma'am. By the end of session, I would like, of this session, I would like to get a number of what you think you could beef this unit up to, so we can protect our workers, make sure our employers know what they're supposed to be doing. Instead of, like I said, banging people on the head with citations and lawsuits. If there are other ways to do it, as a governing body, this is our job to protect our workers and our employers. So how many people do you think that would take? So we could work on that.
I understand your where you're coming from, and we will work to try to
Please.
get that number.
Thank you very much.
We want to be realistic, and
No,
Yeah.
but see, here's the thing. It's almost like a bidding thing. I know you want to be realistic, but you gotta give you a perfect scenario. And then we, of course, as bureaucrats, we'll weigh you down. But we want to get that perfect scenario versus, how many sites you think are active, how many are, the sites that need to be visited the most are probably construction sites versus the other sites that maybe, so that kind of quantification, so we could understand and then come back with, this is the kind of unit we as a body want to see.
that is very helpful guidance, Chairman. I appreciate that, and we will work to try to do that. May I make one comment supplementary here? We're never going to have enough investigators to visit every residential, right? So part of this is about strategy. Part of this is about coordination. Part of this is about moving the needle. Part of this is about education and research and moving the needle in every single possible way we can. Certainly that does require staff, and it may require more than the 5 over the target pins that the governor's budget and that we asked for and that the governor included in the budget. It may, but we're never going to have enough, individuals to visit every work site out there on the regular. You
Without a
understand
doubt,
that.
but I will say, much like policing, but you do know the targeted areas. You know the areas that tend to have the most violations, and that's kind of how you build I would imagine, how you would build your organization by focusing on those areas. Of course, there's always outliers. Of course, like you said, every residential home, but you start with where the problems really lie.
Absolutely.
And then work our way out. That's what I would ask of you.
And we will do that. And thank you for that guidance.
Thank you for, let me go on to the questions. We have Delegate Adams.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and good morning. So could you go back? It's one more. So my only question is, in that graph in 2020, 2021, and 2022,
Yep.
I mean, that was happening during COVID, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, there's probably an explanation beyond just an administrative attitude towards classification that relates to that graph, would be my observation. And you don't need to answer that. I'm making a political statement. But the other thing I'll say is during the Hogan administration, he was governor in 2015, his secretary 2016, 2017. So there was a peak in investigations during the Hogan administration. It, of course, it did go down. So I'm just making the observation. Do you think that COVID may have had something to do with the more recent trend, and maybe not just about the?
I think it's a reasonable guess, but I don't, we didn't have any evidence that said, we stopped doing site visits because of COVID. I don't believe there was anything in those files that we went through that suggested that. I mean, there were still employees there being paid to work in the worker classification protection unit. There was just a lack of investigations and certainly a lack of actual findings of misclassification.
Yeah, I mean, I found both with federal agencies and state agencies during COVID, that a lot of the employees that work for us, the state and the taxpayers, actually never did go back to work. Now, I don't want to make an assumption and say that this unit didn't go back to work. I'm just going to simply say during COVID, the world changed for private sector and public sector employers, and that's my observation. The second question that I have, and this may go, Commissioner, in your direction, which is the joint task force, which is bringing comptroller, workers' comp, unemployment insurance. Does that also include the IRS? Are they part of, or is there a federal component, or is that not the case?
No, there is not a federal component, Delegate Adams. It's
Okay.
a state agency task force.
So the question I have is, when you use the test, the ABC test, that is a specific test that we use under worker classification and workplace fraud unit.
Yes.
The comptroller uses a different test. Is that correct?
You may well be correct. There are a number of different employee status tests that exist, to the consternation of many employees and employers alike.
I'll say to your defense that it's a frustration, having a standard that is predictable amongst all different agencies that care. So, for example, workers' compensation. We talked about this one-on-one. That is a very important benefit that's provided to workers, and I'm not sure what their test is when they start questioning whether or not this worker has worker compensation benefits. But my guess is that it's a different test than the ABC test that you're using.
It may be. There are, as we said, I think we agree, there are a number of different tests out there. And that's one of the reasons why I think we're eager to get the task force up and running, so that we all understand what the world is that each one of our agencies is living in and what we have to try to address the issue.
Right. And then the follow-up to that question is fairly simple. The comptroller test, which I believe is the IRS test, is either a 20-point test or an economic reality test. Let me just simply say it is a easier test to pass than the ABC test, which is 3-prong, and you have to pass all 3. And the state has the rebuttable presumption, which is to say, okay, here's the test, and now you get to tell us where we went wrong. But I mean, the comptroller does have a easier to comply with test, and I think it gets to the same frustrations that you as a department have, probably the chairman has, that we need to make sure workers are protected. Would you agree with that, or would you say, no, I think the comptroller's economic reality test maybe doesn't quite go far enough to nail down this issue?
I would say that if I may, that I don't know enough yet, and that's one of the purposes of the task force, is to learn kind of what's translatable and what makes sense. As a task force, we're not empowered, obviously, to change one another's statutes or policies or governing laws, but we certainly can compare what those are and determine points of similarity and points of difference, and try to figure out how that makes a difference in actually addressing the problem in a holistic manner.
Thank you, and I agree with that. My last question, and the chairman and I, sounds like we agree on this front and back, but the question about outreach and going out to the employers, that is, I've said before, I said it during a hearing, I said it one-on-one with you, you're a strong department. And if you come into these markets just purely through the lens of, hey, here we are, maybe you haven't seen us lately, but here we are, and here are the things, you could do that through the Chamber of Commerce's, I think CPAs, the bars, which are the legal, the folks that advise business owners, the ones that are paying attention, the ones that want to comply with the law. This is a strong, heavy law, and I think you would get a lot of movement on the subject through the lens of that. I don't know that I'd go out in public and say I only have 5 investigators. I mean, we're doing this in a public setting, but I think that the observation is that the Department of Labor is strong and has the ability to pursue this. And how you go about that is the politics for a different conversation. But most business owners that are paying attention would heed those kind of meetings in a way that would be helpful to the cause.
I couldn't agree more. And I think part of what the task force is designed to do is that sort of education, because again, each one of the agencies that's a participant in the task force has different audiences with whom they regularly communicate for different reasons. And we can hopefully leverage some of those existing communication channels to be clear to employers or to businesses that if they are employers, what their obligations are under the law and increase compliance that way. It's all about trying to move the needle as much as we can with the tools that we have.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, not to beat a dead horse, they kind of covered it. What, you took long enough, it was good. But no, they kind of covered it, but one of the things I heard you say was, we haven't issued a citation in 3 years.
That's
I mean,
right.
that makes me think that that's your default position.
I'm sorry?
One of the things I heard you say was, we haven't issued a citation in 3 years.
We-
We regularly, they,
Yeah.
they,
The WCPU did not issue a citation between 2020 and 2020.
we regularly have agencies and departments come in here and say, you know, we've done a lot of outreach and we're doing this. And that, my light immediately went on because I was wondering if that's the default position. You know, we haven't cited anybody, yet we're strengthening legislation. So I was just,
I don't work for the Department of Labor. I work for you.
Okay.
And did this evaluation, and
Okay.
you know, I'd get in a lot of trouble if I took a policy position.
okay. Well, that was sort of your position. So, okay.
No, I want to make sure that we understand, guys. These guys are just DLS. They literally go out and evaluate these different programs. The commissioner can answer your question way better than these two. They just, we send them out, they do their work, they come back. So please don't ask them any policy for suggestions. They're very limited in what they can say, and I don't want to make them any more uncomfortable than we already are. But but you can ask the commissioner, but these, as far as, if you want to get into the nuts and bolts on what they evaluated and how, or even the recommendations, but as far as the whys, they're not going to be able to answer that question.
Well, that's fine. I'm sorry if I was a bit confused. I just, you know, we have these new legislation coming out. We have people testifying on behalf of it, which would basically put employers in jail. And then we have other people saying, well, you know, we haven't issued a citation in 3 years. You know, it made my spidey senses kind of perk up. So, yeah. Okay, they haven't issued, okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the briefing. I'm very interested in this subject because just recently, a couple of days ago, when I was at a community event at a major service provider, a nonprofit Asian American service provider in Montgomery County, I heard this complaint and a concern that now the organization is required to turn all their workers into W-9 or something. No, W-2. Yeah, W-2, I mean. And it came from the Department of Health, okay, which is not your department. But that makes me wonder, because the issue is very similar. In fact, for 2 years in a row, I introduced a bill in the past 2 years in a row to require that all the home care workers are properly classified by those agencies that receive money from the state. And so then, you know, the AG's office was asked to issue a guidance document to the employers, and no more than 2 pages, very simple, to explain to the employers that they must comply. And here's the consequences for not passing the ABC test and all of that, right? So I wonder if you could use the same kind of principle to apply to your work, and if you are collaborating with the Maryland Department of Health on that front, because this is an issue and the education is part of the equation. And a lot of these, you know, could be nonprofits in it to serve the community, right? Of course, it would be wrong to just stick them with some hefty fines or citation when they don't even know what's going on. So yeah, I'm just very curious about how you approach this.
Thank you for that question. Yes, education is a significant part of the equation from both ends, educating employers and businesses on the one hand, or educating businesses who don't know whether they are employers or what it means to be an employer. I think that is a very important part of the process, both in connection with the enforcement of this statute, which again only goes to construction and landscaping as it's currently drafted, but also in the larger context of the Joint Enforcement Task Force, which could encompass home care workers and you know, all workers in the state. So I know that there was a guidance document. I'm a little less familiar with the process that was, the bill that resulted in that guidance document. But certainly I can wholeheartedly endorse, the department endorses the notion of educating employers and businesses as to what their obligations are and how to comply with them in a simple fashion. And may I add, that's one of the reasons that SDAT, for instance, is a member of the task force. That's the reason why O&P, our occupational professional licensing, is a member of the task force. These are all places, they are portals, if as it were, for businesses and individuals who are licensed to interact with our state and our systems. And those are places that they already go in order to do business. And those seem like good places for us as a department, as a group, as an administration, to educate them and reach them. I do believe it's about reaching both businesses and workers where they are. And that is, how exactly we tackle that in a given industry is going to depend on the industry.
I should have added that the legislation we passed also requires each employer to report to the Maryland Department of Health how they exactly categorize their employees, whether contractors or employees. I wonder if that would apply easily, because those are the companies that receive funding from the state. So in your case, it could be different, but I wonder if more data collection would help you.
I think it would certainly help the work of the task force to research where misclassification is maybe occurring, where it's most likely to occur, what populations, groups, industries, types of workers are most affected. It's only by knowledge, again, that we are able to try to tackle the problem. And the problem may present itself differently depending on the industry and depending on the kinds of workers and employers involved. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you guys for coming in. My question is more or less about what can we do more, especially around the recommendation number 3, where we talk to the fact that the annual report hasn't been done since 2020, which is required by law. So, we can make the law, but enforcement isn't us. And so what do you suggest that we do? Because that isn't, even with COVID, I'm more from the financial side, like the comptroller's office, you still got to send in your tax report. You still got to do your annual report. So that's no excuses for that. So what do we do about enforcement?
Yeah, so I believe that the annual reports, and I will check this with our legislative team, but I believe the annual reports for 2020 and 2021 have been submitted. The annual report for 2022, I am following the breadcrumbs to try to find where in my division it is, and we will ensure that it is submitted as soon as possible. But I agree with your point, and I take responsibility, and again, we're working on trying to comply with that requirement.
The bar graph that showed, yes, the one. So I'm just trying to understand this in context of the other graph that showed the complaints, although you can see the complaints on here as well, so we don't need the other one. And I'm just wondering if you have any insight into, we're talking about the different administrations and the change in administration. And it looks like there is sort of a larger percentage of citations issued, and then there's a radical decrease in the percentage of citations that are issued. And then there's a subsequent decrease in complaints. So one might look at that and think, if we know how complaints come in, and I'm curious if you can talk about that, if we know how complaints come in, that at some point word got around amongst those who might complain that they're not issuing citations anyway, so we might as well stop complaining. I think my question is, do you have a sense of why there's such a shift from 14 to 15? And then after that, in terms of the percentages, like, was there a difference? I don't think we changed the law. So what changed that there would be such a decrease? I mean, do you have the data in the analysis? And then Commissioner, if you have insight, if the data is not in the analysis, if you have any insight into what might be happening there.
So It is in the written report, but we didn't include a slide on this, but we do show the sources of the complaints that are investigated over time. And there is a category of other. And many of those complaints in certainly 2014 and 2015 were other. I believe other were complaints that were generated from the portal that the Joint Enforcement Task Force was using.
That doesn't function anymore.
Does not function.
And when did it stop functioning?
We were up there in maybe June, and the person who at the time ran WCPU said that no one else, they were the only ones still using the portal, but everybody else had stopped using it. And you were there in that meeting with us, and I asked him to log in so I could see what it looked like, and he didn't know how to log into it.
I'm sorry, but like who would, so it would be people on the joint task force who would have had access, or who could have, like, could I go in if I heard about somebody?
No, I think it would have only been people who were partners or members of that task force. Yeah.
It's like some of the comptroller's office or something.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it seems like the decline in those complaints that are other, that I think are from the portal. And again, that's just an educated guess. I think the drop off in those sort of coincided with a drop off in any records of the Joint Enforcement Task Force meeting.
Okay, so that would describe the drop off, but the drop off sort of follows a drop off in percentage of citations. Do you have any insight into why there would be a difference in the citation?
There was in a lot of those files, you would see that a complaint had been made. You could see what the source of it was. And then a number of them just said closed per a person's name who was in charge of those things. So there was no other evidence that that complaint had been, that a letter had been sent to the employer asking them for documentation, that anyone had picked up the phone. Many of them, it just said closed per the person who at the time was in charge of that.
So that would make it hard for you to sort of
There's
do
no
an
evidence that-
investigation of whether they actually followed Comar to determine if it should be closed. Is that right?
There were many complaints, records of complaints, where there was no evidence that any investigation had been done.
And so that could be what was happening in 17, 18, when there's this tiny percentage that are coming to.
Could have been, and I couldn't tell you
Okay.
the exact years where we saw a lot of that.
And I guess, Commissioner, do you have any insight into what might be going on there?
I think not really any more than what Mr. Powell and his team were able to find, which was inconsistent attention to investigation. I guess that's all I'll say. I wasn't here, so I don't really want to speculate as to what was in place. What I can say is that we issued our first citations since, I guess, 2021 in November of 2023. These were non-knowing citations. That's not going to be reflected in the slides here because I believe that the cutoff time is June of 2023. So even though it's 2023, it's really only half a year and predates my my tenure as commissioner. We have new supervision in the unit, both at the first level as well as at the second level. We have committed supervision in the unit. We have retrained all of our staff. We are, as I said to the chairman, attempting mightily to recruit, and we will have training available and a process and a set of protocols for those folks to follow. And we are hopeful that you know, the ship that we are building will sail, and that we will be able to figure out if it's leaking anywhere and be able to tighten it up. We are paying close attention to this unit, to this set of problems as a division, as a department, and as an administration.
Yeah, I just one last thought. I mean, I think it looks like there's potentially the need to rebuild trust because it
Absolutely.
doesn't seem like it's a coincidence that complaints go down after the word gets out that nothing's going to happen if you file a complaint. And so there's a lot of talk about proactive, proactive outreach. But even the complaint system itself has to be fixed,
Yes.
it seems.
Yes.
Isn't that so?
That is so. We need to
Thank you,
rebuild
Mr. Chair.
systems, we need to rebuild resources, and we need to rebuild trust, all at the same time.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just on that same graph, the department was actually saying in practice, and maybe your report reflects this, but their goals were different than the O'Malley administration goals, which is they would go out and do outreach, and they wanted companies to come into compliance. That was the secretary's position on that. So it would not be entirely out of the realm of possibility. What you're seeing is the number of reported classification. You're saying no citation, but investigation that did not lead to a citation because perhaps they were working with the businesses to bring them into compliance. Would you deem that to be the case? I'm asking Michael that question.
That's certainly a possibility.
Okay, that's all. Great, thank you.
Okay, this concludes the hearing or the briefing for this afternoon. I will see everybody back here at 1 p.m. for bill hearings. Thank you.
Thank you.